Hello everybody, Mobius1 here, bringing you part 5 of my Star Wars Unlimited Shadows of the Galaxy card set review. In this episode, we're going to be checking out a series of cards that were revealed to us back at the beginning of May, including another new leader. And a couple of these cards are really challenging to analyze because they're simply not like anything that we have already in Spark of Rebellion. If you like this sort of content, please don't forget to leave a like and a comment. If you're new to the channel, I do lots of Star Wars gaming videos with a focus on Star Wars Unlimited now, but I will be doing a series on Star Wars Outlaws once that comes out later in August. If that sounds like something you want to check out, or if you just want to see more of the Unlimited videos as they come out, don't forget to subscribe. But with that out of the way, let's jump right into this episode's cards. And we're going to start this episode with the new leader card, which is Hunter, who is a command heroism leader who has action for 1 resource and exhaust. You can reveal a resource you control. If it shares a name with a friendly, unique unit, return the resource to its owner's hand and put the top card of your deck into play as a resource. And then on 7 resources, Hunter deploys into a 5/8 stat line with Overwhelm, and his ability more or less remains the same. It just changes to an on-attack trigger instead of having to pay a resource for it. And right away, this is what I'm talking about difficult to analyze, because this is totally different than anything that we have in Spark of Rebellion. I say totally different, but the deploy on 7 for a 5/8 body does actually match Darth Vader. And even Darth Vader doesn't have Overwhelm, although I think his on-attack to deal 2 damage to a unit is still very useful. I think the best way to look at Hunter's ability is a form of conditional card draw, right? Because you need to have a unique unit in play and have also resourced that unique unit earlier in the game. But what's kind of unfortunate about the ability is that it only works with unique units. So say you're running like a blue-green-white deck and you've got a Luke Skywalker Jedi Knight on the board. You attack with Hunter and you happen to have resourced a Luke Skywalker Jedi Knight at the beginning of the game because maybe you had one in your opening hand. You'll get to show your opponent, hey, I did in fact resource Luke Skywalker, draw it back in, replace the resource with the top card of your deck, and now you have a second Luke Skywalker in your hand that you can't really play. I mean, yes, if you've watched my How to Play Star Wars Unlimited video, which, by the way, the link to that will be in the video description, you may remember that you can, in fact, play a unique unit while already having one in play. You're just forced to choose one of those 2 units to immediately defeat. So while Hunter's ability is a kind of roundabout form of card draw, it's also letting your opponent know, hey, if you ever defeat this unit, I've got another one coming. I will concede that the 5/8 stat line with Overwhelm is particularly good. I feel like we just talked about this an episode or 2 ago, talking about the card Clan Challengers, but imagine attaching an Entrenched onto Hunter, making him an 8/11 with Overwhelm. Just like with Clan Challengers, yes, he would not be allowed to attack bases, but if your opponent plays anything into the ground arena, hitting them with 8 attack with Overwhelm means that they're probably going to die, and any excess damage is still going to get carried over to the base. And that's not even considering whatever other crazy upgrades we still have yet to see from Shadows of the Galaxy. In an earlier episode, we saw Crosshair, and I think it's a little unfortunate that he's got the villainy aspect while Hunter has the heroism aspect. And even though that makes sense thematically, that does make it more challenging to include all of the Bad Batch characters in the same deck. I think I had mentioned we were talking about Crosshair, that it would have been cool if there was like a Clone Force 99 or Bad Batch trait, so that kind of like how Hera allows you to ignore aspect penalties for Spectre Squad members, it could have included, you know, we could have been able to play all of the Bad Batch characters together. But put a pin in that for now, and we'll talk about that again in a little bit. Overall, I think if Hunter is going to be played, it's probably going to be for his 5/8 Overwhelm stat line, and less for his ability, but I could be wrong. And we'll stick with the Bad Batch theme for now and talk about the next card, Tech. Holy cow, Tech is a 3-cost 2/5 and says each friendly resource gains Smuggle. The gained Smuggle cost is that card's cost plus 2 resources and its aspect icons. And on top of that, Tech himself can be smuggled for 4. And in case you hadn't noticed, he only has 1 aspect requirement, Heroism. Which means if you're playing a light side deck, it doesn't matter what colors are in it, he can fit right in. Yeah, this card's pretty crazy. While the 2/5 stat line is not incredibly impressive, the 5 HP does give him a bit of staying power, make him stick on the board. Think of how many games you've played where you've resourced a high-cost card early in the game and wish that you could have played it later on to help you close things out. Tech would allow you to do that. Not only does Tech allow you to do that, but the fact that he's got Smuggle on himself means that you can resource him, and if that situation never arises, you don't need to play him. I really don't even have much else to say about Tech. I just love the card. I don't think he's going to be an auto-include in every heroism deck, but if you thought adding a couple Smuggle cards to your deck for increased flexibility was a good idea, imagine having the ability to give any card in your deck Smuggle. It's literally a game changer. And because of that, I'm going to say that Tech is probably going to see a lot of play. And we've got one more Bad Batch card to look at in this video, and that is Omega, a 2-cost 2/2 that says ignore the aspect penalty on the first clone unit you play each round. And when played, you can search the top 5 cards of your deck for a clone card, reveal it, and draw it. And this is why I said to put a pin in the whole Crosshair idea, because Omega would actually allow you to play Crosshair in a Hunter deck. Whether or not you'd really want to do that is another question, but hey, at least the option's there. So earlier I was talking about how Hera allows you to play the Spectre cards all in the same deck, and while Omega does give you that same sort of flexibility with clone units, it's not nearly as powerful as Hera because Hera's your leader. So that effect is constantly active. If you've built your deck with a bunch of clones that don't have the same aspect colors and you're planning on getting them in play with the use of Omega, and you don't draw Omega, you're going to be in a world of hurt. And even if you do draw her and put her in play, she's only a 2/2, which is super easy for your opponent to remove. I think if she was a 2/2 shielded like Crafty Smuggler, that would allow her to stick around on the board for a little bit longer and let you take better advantage of her ability. But because she's so fragile, I just don't think building a deck around this ability is a good idea. I think a better effect for Omega would have been to just simply reduce the cost of clone units that you play by either 1 or 2 resources. That would, in a sense, also negate the aspect penalty, but would also give you a bit of a benefit for playing clone units that match the deck colors that you're building with. That way, if you don't draw Omega, you don't feel like you're being punished for playing the cards that you've decided to play. Yeah, Omega's cute and all, and I love the Bad Batch, but I'm not feeling this card, so until we see the rest of the Bad Batch cards and see what aspects they might have, I imagine they're probably going to be spread across a bunch of different aspects. Then if they're really powerful working together, then perhaps Omega could be worth running, but as of now, it's a no-go for me. Next up, let's take a look at the 3-cost event Relentless Pursuit, which says choose a friendly unit. It captures an enemy non-leader unit that costs the same as or less than it, and if the friendly unit is a bounty hunter, give a shield token to it. In the last episode, we took a look at Take Captive, which is also a 3-cost event that allows a friendly unit to capture an enemy non-leader unit in the same arena, and I wasn't really impressed with Take Captive. Now, Relentless Pursuit is a little bit more restricted than Take Captive because it does require the target to cost less than or equal to the unit you're using to capture it with, but the fact that you're putting a shield token on the capturing unit, so long as they're a bounty hunter, is a big deal because it makes it so much more difficult for your opponent to get their captured unit back. The whole reason I haven't been totally sold on this capture mechanic is because it's a form of temporary removal. But if you're able to delay your opponent from getting that unit back and, stretch out the time that temporary removal lasts, then it starts looking better. And I have to remind you that with the bounty cards that we're going to be getting in Shadows of the Galaxy, you get to collect the bounty reward when you either defeat or capture the unit. And if there's going to be a cunning bounty hunter deck, which I imagine there will be, then Relentless Pursuit will fit right into that deck. But don't worry, if your opponent does end up capturing your units, you could always be running L337, who is a 2-cost 2/2. When played, you may rescue a captured card. If you don't, give a shield token to this unit. And L3 has Smuggle for 4. Well, we were just talking about how Omega would be better if she was a 2-cost 2/2 shielded, and L3 is basically that. In her most basic form, L3 is just a crafty smuggler with the heroism aspect requirement. They even both have the underworld trait, so any synergies you'll get off of that will be the same. However, if you're up against a deck that's capturing your units, you now have a tech card that can be played to get those units back immediately. And not only that, the fact that she has Smuggle means you can just resource her, and if that situation ever arises where you need to rescue a captured unit, you've got the option to. I would almost say that L3 is a strictly better crafty smuggler for heroism cunning decks. But there's one minor detail that prevents me from saying that, and it's the fact that L3 is unique. If you happen to draw multiple Crafty Smugglers, you can flood the board with as many as you want, but you'll only be able to have one L3 in play at a time. Is that a big deal? Probably not. And actually, because L3 has Smuggle, I think if you've got one in play and you draw another one, you don't feel bad at all for resourcing it. With all the new cards coming out, I don't know if Crafty Smuggler is still going to be competitive enough to be run in decks, but I do think if you're running Cunning Heroism, you're probably going to want to take L3 over Crafty Smuggler going forward. Another card you might want to include in your Cunning deck is McClunky, which is a 1-cost event. Return a friendly non-leader Underworld unit to its owner's hand. If you do, deal 3 damage to a unit. It's funny that we were just talking about the niche scenario in which you might use Waylay to bounce your own unit back into your hand in an earlier episode. And now we have a card that does exactly that and then gives you the upside of dealing 3 damage. Now, it does need to be an Underworld unit, but it looks like we're getting a pretty good Underworld Cunning package this set. The question is simply how often are you going to want to bounce your own units back into your hand? And I think depending on how good of a win played effect that Underworld card has, it might actually be a really strong play. For example, we were just looking at L3. L3 is an Underworld unit with the win played rescue a captured card. So if your opponent is just going nuts capturing your units, you could play L3, rescue a captured unit, play McClunky, deal 3 damage to something while bouncing L3 back into your hand, and then playing her again to rescue a second captured unit. That probably won't happen all that often. However, what if you've got a Fett's Fire Spray in play? You could attack with Fett's Fire Spray, play McClunky, deal 3 damage to something, bounce Fett's Fire Spray back into your hand to be replayed again, and if you've got Boba Fett or Jango Fett in play, it'll ready up and be able to attack in the same round. We already know how powerful of a card Fett's Fire Spray is in Boba Fett decks, and being able to swing at your opponent's base with Fett's Fire Spray, get it back into your hand, and play it again to swing a second time in the same phase could probably win you a couple games. Heck, say you've got Fett's Fire Spray in play and they play Bright Hope to block it. You could attack Bright Hope with your Fett's Fire Spray, play McClunky to bounce it back to your hand using the 3 damage from McClunky to finish off Bright Hope, then replay your Fett's Fire Spray and still strike base. All I'm saying is don't sleep on this card. I think it's going to be a part of some sort of game-winning combo at some point. Alright, the next one we've got is another event, 2 cost for Cripple Authority, which says draw a card. Each opponent who controls more resources than you discards a card from their hand. And first of all, what is up with that artwork? Alright, so we've got some combination card draw and hand disruption. So let's first compare it to Mission Briefing, which is a 3 cost, choose a player, they draw 2 cards that we already have. I'm not going to say this card's never been run, but I've never seen it run. It's important to remember that while card draw is still a good effect, it's not as good in Star Wars Unlimited as it is in other card games because we get 2 cards per turn. And our decks aren't flooded with dead draws like land cards that you'd get in Magic the Gathering. Just looking at Mission Briefing, you're paying 3 resources to essentially gain +1 cards because you're playing a card to draw 2. So your hand size will be 1 more than it was before you played the card. Cripple Authority only draws you 1 card, so it's not really card draw as much as it is card cycling. It does, however, have the conditional advantage of making your opponent discard a card if they have more resources than you. And if you're running a red aggression deck, you may have stopped resourcing earlier than your opponent. Many aggro decks stop resourcing around 6 or 7 resources, while other tempo, mid-range, or control decks will go well beyond 7 or 8. So I think it's not unlikely that you would get the second effect from Cripple Authority. The question though is the effect worth it? A card that is seeing quite a lot of play right now is Spark of Rebellion, which is a 2-cost event just like Cripple Authority, where you get to look at your opponent's hand and choose a card to discard from it. And while Spark of Rebellion doesn't replace itself with a card like Cripple Authority does, the fact that you're the one getting to choose the card and not your opponent is a pretty significant difference. If you're going up against a hard control blue deck and you play Spark of the Rebellion and happen to discard their Super Laser Blast while you've got a full board of units, you're going to feel pretty good. whereas with Cripple Authority, your opponent will get to discard whatever is least impactful at the time. Another similar event that I have actually seen being put into some decks lately is Forced Surrender. It is much more expensive at 6 resources, but you do get to draw 2 cards, so you're not only cycling, but also gaining +1 card. And then each opponent whose base you've damaged this phase discards 2 cards from their hand. If you're running a red deck, you're probably going to be damaging people's bases. And with Forced Surrender, your opponent does still get to decide which cards to discard, but it's 2 instead of 1. I think these cards are on a pretty similar power level, even though, yes, one obviously costs much more, it also does much more, and its conditional effect is much easier to trigger, especially if you're up against another aggro deck. I think Cripple Authority is going to fall into the category of it's not a terrible card, but it's not good enough to compete with some of the other cards that you're going to want to include. Next up, we have Night Owl Skirmisher, who is a 3-cost 4/3 with Smuggle for 5. So ultimately, she's a vanilla 4/3 for 3. Not a perfect comparison, but right now, Fighters for Freedom is probably the most run 3-cost unit in red-white decks, and Fighters for Freedom simply does more than a vanilla 3-drop. But Night Owl Skirmisher has 2 things going for her. 1, she has Smuggle, which means you don't need to play her. You could resource her early in the game, and then later in the game, if you're running out of cards to play, you have the option to play her from your resource row. And the other thing she's got going for her is she's a Mandalorian, which is going to synergize with lots of other cards in this set, including Bo-Katan. Now, I don't know if a vanilla 3-cost 4/3 is going to be worth running in your deck. I think it might run into the same problem as Cripple Authority, where there are simply better cards to play, but the flexibility of Smuggle and the relevance of the Mandalorian trait are both factors that need to be taken into consideration. We're going to have to wait and see what other Mandalorian cards we get to know if Night Owl Skirmisher is really going to be good enough to make the cut, because right now I'm kinda 50-50. And then last but not least in this video, we have Pirate Battle Tank, which is a 6-cost 4/6 Sentinel and also has Smuggle for 7. I wasn't really impressed with Pirate Battle Tank when I first saw it, and I'm still not entirely sold on it, but let's just look at it quickly in this light. We do already have a 6-cost 4/6 Sentinel that is seeing play in Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, Obi-Wan Kenobi does not have the same flexibility that Pirate Battle Tank has when it comes to Smuggle, but he does have 2 other things that are really going for him, which are 1, his When Defeated allows him to give 2 experience tokens to another friendly unit, and if it's a Force unit, draw a card. And the second, probably more important thing he's got going for him is he's a Force unit himself, which we've talked previously about the relevance of the Force trait giving additional effects to other cards such as Jedi Lightsaber. So I don't know, would we play Obi-Wan if he wasn't a Force unit and if he didn't have his When Defeated, but you did have the flexibility of resourcing him early and playing him later in the game for 7? I think in the right deck, you might actually want that. Especially in these aspect colors, the command villainy colors, which does like to run larger, more expensive units such as Reinforcement Walker. The only more expensive Sentinel units that color combination has right now are like Gladiator Star Destroyer, which is also a 6-cost, but when played, it only gives a unit Sentinel for 1 phase. Or like Devastator, which, yes, is a 10/10 Sentinel, which is terrifying, but it also costs 10 resources. Just to compare to other cards, if we branch out into the Vigilance Villainy aspect combos, we do have Academy Defense Walker, which is another 6-cost Sentinel. And while it does have a when played of giving experience tokens to friendly damaged units, I don't think Academy Defense Walker is really run. Although I am conveniently reminded of the Grit units we were looking at a couple episodes ago, so maybe Academy Defense Walker just hasn't had its time to shine yet. But again, if we're talking about blue-black cards with Sentinel, we have to talk about Lieutenant Childsin, which for 4 could be a 6/6 Sentinel. And Pirate Battle Tank just can't compete with that, even with its Smuggle ability. So I think as a final verdict, I'm going to give Pirate Battle Tank a not good enough to run in Premiere, but probably a really solid draw in Sealed or Draft. There was another card in an earlier episode I said something along those lines for, I don't remember what card it was, but yeah, I think if you're playing one of those other formats where you have to build your deck with the cards you have available, I think Pirate Battle Tank will be really solid, but in Premiere, I just don't think it'll be worth running. And that's it for this episode. Doing these videos has been a lot of fun for me. I know we have so many cards to get through, and it's probably going to take me well beyond the actual release date for Shadows of the Galaxy to get through all of them. But I've always wanted to do these kind of videos. Ever since I played Hearthstone, watching other content creators do card reviews seems super fun, and I'm glad I'm getting to do them myself now. Again, if you guys enjoyed this, please leave a like and comment. Let me know which of these cards you thought was most interesting or which you're looking forward to play with the most. If you're looking for other people to chat Star Wars Unlimited with, or if you're looking for people to play games with, you can always join my Discord. Link to that's in the video description. But that's going to be it for now. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you all for watching. Mobius1 here, and I'll see you in the next one.